At this point, when you're watching this, or at least when we're filming it, Texas is less than 1 week away from executing a woman named Melissa Lucio, a mother who was convicted of murder in the death of her 2-year-old daughter more than a decade ago. There's a chance that you're familiar with some of the details of this story. What you will find if you're not is that the more you hear about this, the more unacceptable them going forward with this is. Every detail just shows how little concern there was for getting to anything even approaching the truth of what happened in that tragic death. We're gonna give you some of the basic facts to understand this, but you saw there the Innocence Project, which is obviously working on this, putting out a photo of Melissa Lucio. Now, back in 2008, Melissa was sentenced to death in Texas for the murder of her 2-year-old daughter, Mariah, who died 2 days after a tragic fall. Now, what happened is the child fell down a flight of stairs while the family was moving homes in 2007. The toddler had a mild physical disability that made her unstable while walking and prone to tripping. 2 days later, she took a nap and didn't wake up, which is, no matter any other detail of the story, an absolute tragedy, clearly. But that does not mean that it's murder. And there's a massive difference between one of the worst tragedies that can regrettably happen to a family and then implying that it was purposeful, the result of abuse. Now, that is the direction that the Justice Department went in, or those investigating this. So authorities jumped in. They did not seem particularly interested in the disability that we mentioned earlier that might lead the child to be more prone to these sorts of falls. What they did was an incredibly coercive interrogation of Melissa Lucio. So it was over 6 hours long, late into the night. Already terrible conditions, especially for a mother who just lost her child. They used what's called the Reed technique, which since has been identified as leading to a number of different false confessions. I would find that to be unacceptable. My producer is pointing out that at that point she was also pregnant, so even more context to how devastating this interrogation was. They got in her face, they screamed at her, implying that she had to know what was going on, saying they had evidence that she was to blame for the death, which you cannot miss the fact that they did not. They are lying to her to get her to confess. Then they reassured her that all of this could be done. If she only admits that she was responsible, then she has nothing else to worry about. She said over 100 times during it that she was innocent, over and over and over again. But eventually, after hours of pressure, they broke her and they got her to say what they wanted, to repeat these phrases that they'd been coaching her on throughout that. That coerced confession was the core evidence presented at her trial, apparently critical to the jury's guilty verdict and the death sentence that followed. They did not need to demonstrate some sort of pattern of abuse of the children, anything else that would lead one to believe that aside from the death itself, that she might be responsible. They had the confession, which they forced out of her, and that's the evidence that was used. Now, there's a lot of other details, which we will get to, but Brett, what are your thoughts based on what you've seen so far?
Something specific, the Reed technique, the more you find out about it, the more ridiculous it is. So the Reed technique is essentially a way to get people to admit to something, not the truth, not necessarily the truth. It is just a way of wearing someone down so that they'll say whatever you need them to say so that this can stop. There's no timer on it. Now, sometimes I'm sure the Reed technique results in a confession to what's true. But other times it has been proven that it just leads to people saying whatever the police want, so that they'll essentially no longer have to endure the interrogation.
Yeah, 100%. And again, it's like, I wish we had a time to jump into that, because that is worthy of its own whole thing. But right now, let's focus on Melissa Lucio, especially because time is short. We are mere days away from the execution. Now, on top of everything else that we've already said, evidence that had been presented at the trial has been debunked. The fact that timeline, as my producer points out, that the death was ruled a murder before an autopsy was conducted, which that's unacceptable, obviously. The jury didn't hear about Melissa's own history of trauma and abuse. The DA who prosecuted Lucio was running for re-election, has since been convicted of bribery and extortion. And there has been some, that's the context that's baked into the decision that they got. There's been some very interesting developments since then, including that 5 of the jurors in her case have come out in favor of clemency or a reprieve, citing in part the new evidence. One in particular said, "I voted to sentence Melissa Lucio to death I was wrong. There's a group of 103 bipartisan members of the Texas legislature, including 32 Republican members of the House and 8 Republican state senators. That is 32 Republican members of the House, 8 Republican state senators coming out against an execution, that by itself should be the biggest news of the week potentially. But despite that, it is still moving forward. They are still proceeding, and there's every reason to believe that unless there is a national uproar, that they are going to go through with this. Possibly one of the most unjust executions that we've seen in some time, Brett.
It is. I mean, this is one of those heartbreaking situations. That's why a lot of it, as you go through it, you're like, so we're gonna execute this woman for that. For stuff like this is the reason I don't think we should have a death penalty. You just might be wrong.
Yeah.
Declaring it a murder before you have evidence of it, taking a confession and not really being able to bring actual evidence, and then the process that forbids any additional evidence from coming into the courtroom. But the thing for me is this happened 14 years ago. And she's gonna be killed by the state that says that, listen, we shouldn't have government overreach, but we should also just be able to kill you. And I understand there should be, and when this kind of information comes out, the amount of cost and time that it would take to get this through the justice system in a way that yields justice, which is what the justice system is named after, is prohibitive. Not only in terms of overall resources, but the amount of time she's allowed to be on death row before they kill her.
Yeah. Just think, like you pointed out, the time since it's been there. Imagine, let's say that everything goes the way it should, that they do cancel this thing, which there's at this point not a great reason to believe that's going to happen. We have in the lower third, you can see the phone number there if you want to call Governor Abbott to try to put pressure on him. Of course, it's Governor Abbott, so that's going to be difficult. If you're on the podcast, by the way, the phone number is 956-446-2866. She lost her child. She has spent years and years in which she has been, incarcerated. Many people might have, up until recently, thought that she actually did it. So that's its own terror. Facing death, even if nothing else happened, this has been an unacceptable, unimaginable situation to put this mother through. And she might die as a result of it. Like this should by itself, as you pointed out, this should be enough to get us to end the death penalty, that this sort of injustice can happen. But the thing is, we know that there's hundreds and hundreds of cases exactly like this, where the evidence was just as shoddy, the forced confessions were just as clear, and the techniques that were used were just as objectionable. But we just keep letting it happening, and this is Texas, and some Republicans, to their credit, are coming out against it, but for the most part, like, perfectly fine with this. This is hardly new, specifically in Texas.
Yeah, and there's other facts, like if you read the objection, the strongly worded but still respectful letter from all the legislators. I think in there they point out that that her husband, who has a history of violence, has gone to jail and gotten out since then, and she's still there.
Insane.
And they just decide, and that's it. That's what's so frustrating. And then what is Governor Abbott gonna do? Is he gonna extend this? No, he's like, there's a brown person, we're gonna put him in jail. Like, I don't lose any points for keeping that there. Plus, we get to kill someone, which they in Texas, his base loves.
For more political news, breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/thedamagereport. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.